18 months ago, I quietly placed my grandparents' $3 million estate into a trust. Just to be safe, my name is Maya Thompson. I'm 31 years old. Last week, my mother showed up at my doorstep. She carried a plate of homemade cookies, the kind she only bakes when she wants something. Her smile was a perfect brittle thing that didn't reach her eyes. My father followed a step behind her, smelling of expensive cologne and the cheap charm he turned on for strangers. My brother Daniel lagged in the back, his face buried in his phone, acting like he wasn't part of this ambush. They hadn't spoken to me in 18 months. Not a call, not a text. Not since the day we buried my grandparents. So I knew this wasn't a family reunion. They stood on my welcome mat, a picture of a perfect family that had never really existed. They weren't here for me. They were here for the $3 million estate my grandparents left behind. The house on the coast, the stocks, the savings, the life my grandparents built. The inheritance I had already moved into a legal fortress, a place so secure they would never be able to touch it. I let them in. I didn't offer them anything to drink. We sat in my living room, the silence thick and heavy. Finally, Mom set the cookies on my coffee table. "Maya," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, a sound I knew from my childhood. "We were thinking, maybe it's time we all sit down and discuss selling the property. It's only fair, I thought, looking at their expectant faces. "You don't mean fair. You mean profitable." Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. I grew up in a house where silence was a shield. My parents' marriage was a long, cold war fought in a language of slammed doors, heavy sighs, and meals eaten without a single word exchanged. My brother Daniel and I were the unwilling soldiers in their conflict, but we were treated very differently. Daniel was the flag they waved proudly. I was the forgotten ration in the bottom of a pack. Daniel was the sun. Everything and everyone revolved around him. He was 2 years older, handsome and effortlessly charming. When he was 8, he threw a baseball straight through the dining room window. I remember holding my breath, waiting for the explosion. My father came running in, saw the shattered glass, and then saw Daniel's wide, innocent eyes. A smile broke across my dad's face. He ruffled Daniel's hair. "Great arm, son," he said, laughing. "Next time, let's try it outside." Later that week, when I accidentally spilled a glass of juice on the carpet, my mother told me I was clumsy and careless, and that I needed to think before I acted. There was no laugh. There was no ruffled hair. That was the pattern of our lives. When Daniel got a C on his report card, my parents scheduled a meeting with the teacher to argue about his teaching methods. When I brought home straight A's, my mom would glance at the paper and say, "That's nice, dear," before sticking it on the fridge without another look. Her praise was a box to be checked, not a feeling to be shared. Daniel's successes were family victories, celebrated with dinner at his favorite restaurant. My successes were quiet, personal achievements that went largely unnoticed. I learned to be invisible. I became the family's silent manager. I was the one who knew the trash pickup schedule, the one who made sure my dad's dry cleaning was ready for his business trips, the one who kept the family calendar on the fridge updated with appointments my mom would otherwise forget. I did it because if I didn't, things would fall apart, and the resulting chaos would make the house even more tense. I wasn't thanked for it. It was just expected, like the sun rising in the morning. I was a function, a utility. I kept the machine of our family running smoothly, an unseen gear turning in the dark. My only escape was my grandparents' house on the coast. It was my real home. Their visits to pick me up became my lifeline. I'd see their old Buick pull into the driveway, and a sense of relief would wash over me that was so complete it felt like I could finally breathe. Grandma Evelyn would walk in, her presence a wave of calm in our chaotic house. She'd find me in my room and say, "Time for a beach trip, sweet pea." I didn't have to explain. She just knew. Their house smelled of salt, old books, and whatever my grandmother was baking. It was a place of gentle routines. In the mornings, Grandpa Robert would take me through the stock pages in the newspaper. He'd point to the charts and numbers, his voice patient and steady. "Look here, Maya," he'd say. "This company is solid. Slow growth, but dependable. Like a good oak tree. This other one is flashy. All over the news, but its roots are shallow. Never trust flash over substance. And never ever let anyone else be in charge of your money. You learn this for yourself. You be your own protector." He wasn't just teaching me about finances. He was teaching me about life, about people. In the afternoons, I'd be in the kitchen with Grandma Evelyn. Her hands, dusted with flour, were always busy. She taught me how to measure, how to knead, how to wait for the dough to rise. "The secret isn't just in the recipe, sweet pea," she'd say, her eyes twinkling. "It's in putting your love into what you're making. That's what people taste. That's what they remember." She saw me. She saw my quiet nature not as a flaw, but as a strength. "You're a good listener, Maya," she told me once. You notice things other people are too busy talking to see. In my parents' house, my quietness made me invisible. In my grandparents' house, it made me wise. When I was 14, my parents had a fight that felt different. It was colder, more final. My mom threw a plate and my dad punched a hole in the hallway wall. Daniel was out with his friends. I was in my room listening, my body tense. After the shouting stopped, I packed a duffel bag, walked out the front door, and called my grandparents from a payphone. Grandpa Robert answered. I just said his name and my voice broke. He didn't ask any questions. He just said, "We're on our way." That was the day I moved in with them for good. My parents didn't fight it. I think they were relieved. They called once a week for the first month, then once a month, then mostly just on holidays. They had Daniel, their shining sun. They didn't need their quiet, complicated shadow. My grandparents became my parents in every way that mattered. They came to every piano recital, sitting in the front row, their faces beaming with pride. They helped me with my homework, celebrated my acceptance into college. And when my parents told me they couldn't help with tuition because they'd just co-signed a loan for Daniel's new sports car, my grandparents wrote a check for the entire first year without blinking. "This is an investment in you," Grandpa Robert said, handing it to me. "The best one we'll ever make." They showed up. For everything. The big moments and the small ones. They taught me what unconditional love felt like. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was quiet, constant, and dependable, like the tide that washed up on the beach outside their home. So when they were gone, both of them taken by illness within 6 months of each other, the hole they left in my life was immeasurable. I wasn't just losing the people who raised me. I was losing my foundation, my safety, my history. At the funeral, I stood between my mother and father, a symbolic gesture of a family that had long ago ceased to exist. They dabbed their eyes with tissues, but their grief felt hollow, a performance for the crowd. Daniel stood off to the side, checking his phone. It was in that moment, surrounded by people who shared my DNA but not my heart, that I understood I was truly losing the only parents I ever had. The world I knew had crumbled to dust, and I was about to find out that my family wasn't there to help me rebuild. They were there to sift through the rubble for anything valuable. Grief is a heavy fog. In the days after my grandfather's funeral, I moved through my life in a daze. The world felt muffled, distant. Simple tasks, like making coffee or checking the mail, required an enormous amount of effort. I was trying to navigate a world that no longer had my two favorite people in it, and the pain was a constant, physical ache in my chest. I thought my family, seeing my devastation, would offer some comfort. I thought that, for once, our shared loss might bring us together. It was a foolish, naive hope. The day after we buried my grandfather, my phone rang. The screen showed my mother's name. For a single, fragile second, my heart lifted. She's calling to check on me, I thought. She knows how much I'm hurting. Hello? My voice was thin and raspy. "Maya," she said. Her tone wasn't gentle or sad. It was brisk, efficient, like a manager starting a meeting. "Your father and I have been talking. What's the plan for the estate?" The question was so jarring, so completely devoid of emotion that I couldn't speak. The air left my lungs. My grandparents were gone. Their home, my home, was filled with a silence that screamed with loss. And she was asking for a business plan. I don't know, Mom, I managed to say, the words catching in my throat. "I haven't even thought about it." "It's too soon." A sigh of impatience crackled through the phone. "Well, you need to start thinking about it," she snapped. "We can't just let that house sit there. The property taxes alone must be outrageous. It makes no sense to hold on to it. We need to sell, and we need to do it quickly, while the market is good." That house. She called it that house, as if it were some inconvenient building, a line item on a balance sheet. She didn't remember the summers I spent there, or the way the porch swing creaked, or the scent of my grandmother's rose garden. She didn't care that every corner of that house held a memory that was keeping me stitched together. To her, it wasn't a home. It was a $3 million asset waiting to be cashed in. That call was the first crack in the dam. In the weeks that followed, the floodgates opened. The initial shock wore off and was replaced by a relentless, coordinated campaign of greed. My grief wasn't given space to breathe. It was treated as an annoying delay in their financial plans. My father called next. He tried a different tactic, wrapping his greed in a cloak of fatherly advice. "Maya, listen," he said, his voice smooth and reasonable. "I know you're emotional right now, but you have to be practical. An estate this size is complicated. I've already spoken to a real estate agent, a guy named Jim. He's the best in the area. He says he can have the property listed by the end of the month." "I'm not ready, Dad," I said, my voice firmer this time. "It's not about being ready," he countered, his tone hardening. "It's about being smart. This is a life-changing amount of money for all of us." Then came the emails. My mother started forwarding me listings for small condos in my city. "Look at this one, honey." The subject line would read, You could buy something nice like this for yourself once we sell the house. Each email was a little stab, a reminder that they had already spent the money in their heads. They saw my inheritance as a shared family pot, one they were entitled to dip into. Daniel, of course, was the most blunt. He sent me a text message one afternoon. It was a link to a shiny red sports car. Underneath it he wrote, "Already picked mine out. I don't take too long, sis. Prices are going up." He followed it with another text a few minutes later. "Seriously though, you hit the jackpot. Some people have all the luck." Jackpot. Luck. As if I had won a lottery instead of losing the two most important people in my life. The words felt like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just insensitive. It was cruel. He was celebrating his potential financial gain on the ashes of my loss. There was no empathy. There was no compassion. There was only a hungry, grasping greed. One Saturday morning, they showed up at my apartment unannounced. They brought bagels, a pathetic peace offering. We sat in my small kitchen, the three of them on one side of the table, a united front, and me on the other. "We need to talk about this seriously," my dad began, taking charge. "We've done the math. After taxes and fees, we're looking at close to $3 million. Split 4 ways. That's $750,000 each. That's enough for your mother and me to retire comfortably. It's a down payment on a house for Daniel, and you get a nice nest egg for yourself." He said it all so matter-of-factly, as if he were discussing a corporate merger. He had a plan, a spreadsheet in his mind, and my grief was just an inconvenient variable he needed to solve for. "It's not a nest egg," I said, my voice quiet, but shaking with a rage I didn't know I had. "It's my home. It's Grandma and Grandpa's home," my mother scoffed. "Don't be so sentimental, Maya. It's a house. It's bricks and wood. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment." That was the moment I truly understood. They didn't see me. They didn't see my pain. They saw a sentimental, emotional girl standing in the way of their money. My love for my grandparents, the very thing that was causing me so much pain, was, in their eyes, my biggest flaw. They were trying to bulldoze my memories for profit, and they expected me to hand them the keys to the machine. My refusal to immediately put the house on the market was not something my family was prepared to accept. My quiet "I'm not ready yet" was interpreted as a declaration of war. Their campaign of friendly, persuasive phone calls quickly morphed into something uglier. The pressure turned into accusations, and the accusations turned into a coordinated effort to isolate me. My mother led the first charge. She called me one evening, her voice stripped of all its fake sweetness. It was cold and hard, a weapon she'd used against my father for years. "I just don't know who you've become, Maya," she began. No hello, no preamble. "Your grandparents would be so disappointed in you. They would have wanted us to be taken care of. You're being selfish. Utterly and completely selfish. Do you have any idea the position your father and I are in? Do you even care?" I tried to defend myself. "Mom, this isn't about being selfish. This is about mourning. I need time." "Time?" she scoffed, her voice rising. "It's been months. The world doesn't stop for your grief. You're using it as an excuse to hoard everything for yourself, and the entire family sees it." The next day, my father called. He adopted the role of the concerned, rational parent dealing with an unstable child. "Maya, your mother is beside herself with worry," he said, his tone heavy with manufactured concern. "She thinks you're having some sort of breakdown. Frankly, I'm starting to agree. Grief can do strange things to a person's mind. It can make you paranoid, irrational. Maybe it would be best if you let me and your mother handle the estate. You're clearly not in the right state to make these kinds of major financial decisions." He wasn't trying to help me. He was trying to declare me incompetent. He was trying to take my power away by questioning my sanity. But the most painful betrayal came from Daniel. He was a coward, so he didn't confront me directly. He started a whisper campaign. He became the primary source for a new, twisted family narrative. I found out from my cousin Sarah, who called me one afternoon, her voice hesitant and awkward. "Hey, Maya. Is everything okay?" she asked. "As okay as it can be, I guess." "Why?" She took a deep breath. "I'm sorry to even bring this up, but I talked to Daniel yesterday. He said you were refusing to sell the house to punish your parents for your childhood. He said you were holding the inheritance hostage out of spite." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was such a calculated, malicious lie. He had taken my deepest wounds, the neglect, the feeling of being second best, and twisted them into a motive for greed. He painted me as a vengeful, bitter woman, all to make himself and my parents look like the victims. That lie spread through my extended family like a wildfire. Suddenly, the aunts and uncles who had offered hollow condolences at the funeral were calling me with advice. My Aunt Carol told me that forgiveness was a virtue, and that holding on to anger was unhealthy. My Uncle Mark said that family was family, and I had a duty to help my parents. No one called to ask for my side of the story. They had their villain, and I was it. The narrative was set. Poor Mark and Susan, dealing with the loss of their parents, now had to handle their difficult, greedy daughter who had let a little money go to her head. The final straw was a family barbecue at my aunt's house. I knew I shouldn't have gone, but a small, stupid part of me still hoped I could fix it, that I could make them understand. The moment I walked into the backyard, I felt the change. Conversations would stop when I approached. People would give me tight, thin smiles before turning away. I was an outcast. I sat alone at a picnic table, watching my family laugh and talk, and felt a profound sense of loneliness that was worse than being by myself. I could hear Daniel holding court by the grill, his voice loud and confident, probably adding another chapter to the story of his crazy sister. I left without saying goodbye. On the drive home, tears of anger and hurt streamed down my face. I had been trying to protect my memories, and in return, they had systematically destroyed my reputation and my relationships with the rest of my family. They had made me utterly alone. That night, I made a decision. I stopped answering their calls. I deleted their emails without reading them. I blocked my aunts, my uncles, my cousins. I built a wall around myself, high and thick. The silence that followed was deafening at first. The loneliness was a cold, empty space in my life, but then, slowly, something else started to grow in that space. Peace. There were no more accusations. No more manipulative phone calls. No more passive-aggressive texts. I was alone, but I was no longer under attack. I could finally hear my own thoughts again. And I began to understand a powerful truth. The family I was mourning wasn't the one that had just turned its back on me. That family had never really existed. I was mourning the loss of the idea of them. The truth was, my solitude was a sanctuary. It was far safer to be alone than to be surrounded by people who would only love you if you gave them what they wanted. The quiet that followed my self-imposed isolation was restorative. Without the constant noise of my family's demands, I could finally begin to properly grieve. I spent my nights looking through old photo albums, my fingers tracing the smiling faces of my grandparents. I could almost hear their voices, feel their presence. It was during one of these quiet, reflective nights that everything changed. It was a rainy Tuesday, the kind of night that makes you feel the weight of the world. I was in my basement, sorting through a few boxes of my grandparents' belongings that I had brought to my apartment. The air was cool and smelled of dust and old paper. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just wanted to hold pieces of their life in my hands. I found my grandfather's old college sweatshirt, a stack of my grandmother's favorite romance novels, and a box of photos from a trip they took to Italy. Underneath everything, at the bottom of the heaviest box, was a thick beige folder. It felt important. Across the tab, in my grandfather's neat, blocky handwriting, were 2 words: estate planning, confidential. My heart started to pound. With trembling hands, I carried the folder upstairs and sat at my kitchen table. I opened it carefully. Inside, everything was perfectly organized, a testament to my grandfather's meticulous nature. There were copies of their wills, life insurance policies, and bank statements. Paperclipped to the very top flap were 3 business cards: a financial advisor, an estate accountant, and a lawyer named Rebecca Crane. Tucked just behind the cards was a small, folded piece of my grandmother's floral stationery. I recognized her elegant, looping cursive immediately. It felt like she was reaching out to me. The note was short, but it changed the course of my life. "Maya, my sweet pea," it began. "If you are reading this, it means we are gone and we are so sorry to have left you. Your grandpa and I want you to be safe and happy, always. We've worried about what might happen after we're gone. Make sure this home, our home, stays in the right hands. It was always a place for love, not for arguments. We trust you to do the right thing. All our love, Grandma Evelyn." I read the note 3 times, tears blurring the words. We've worried about what might happen. They knew. They knew my parents. They knew my brother. This note wasn't just a sweet sentiment. It was a warning and a mission. We trust you. Those 3 words were a gift. They were giving me permission to fight. They were telling me that protecting their legacy wasn't selfish. It was my duty. A new kind of energy surged through me. It wasn't anger anymore. It was a cold, clear sense of purpose. For months, I had been on the defensive, reacting to my family's attacks. I had been fighting their emotional war, a war I could never win. But my grandparents, in their quiet wisdom, had given me a new set of weapons. This wasn't going to be a fight about feelings anymore. This was going to be a legal battle. I didn't have to out-yell them. I just had to outthink them. The next morning at 9 o'clock sharp, I called the number on the lawyer's card. "Rebecca Crane's office," a professional voice answered. My own voice shook as I asked to make an appointment. Walking into Rebecca's office felt like stepping into another world. It was on the top floor of a downtown building, with a large window overlooking the city. The room was organized and calm, filled with books and quiet confidence. Rebecca Crane was a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a warm, reassuring smile. She shook my hand firmly. "Your grandmother was a wonderful woman," she said as I sat down. "She and your grandfather were clients for over 20 years. They spoke of you often." That small kindness was enough to break down my carefully constructed composure. The whole story came pouring out of me. The golden boy brother, the years of feeling invisible, the relentless pressure since the funeral, the accusations, the lies, the isolation. I laid it all out, not with tears, but with a flat, exhausted precision. Rebecca listened without interruption, her expression calm and focused. She took a few notes. When I finished, there was a long pause. I expected pity, but what I saw in her eyes was respect. "Your grandparents were very wise," she said finally, "and very prescient. They set up their will to leave the estate to you, but they always feared it would put you in a difficult position with the rest of your family." She then began to explain the law to me in a way I could understand. She laid out all my options on the table like cards in a game. She talked about the will, how it could be contested by my family, leading to a long, expensive, and ugly court battle. She talked about selling, about keeping the house, about the tax implications of each choice. Then she leaned forward slightly. "But there is another option," she said, her voice lowering. "It's more complex, but it's also far more secure. It's called an irrevocable trust." She explained that a trust was like a legal box. I could transfer all the assets, the house, the stocks, the savings, into this box. The box, the trust itself, would then own everything. I would no longer be the owner. I would be the manager, the trustee. I was trying to grasp the concept. "So, the house wouldn't be mine anymore?" I asked. "That's the beauty of it," she replied. "It wouldn't be yours to sell. It wouldn't be yours to give away. It would belong to the trust. And a trust has rules. The rules that you set. Your family can argue with you, Maya. They can pressure you and guilt you, but they can't argue with a legal document." She paused, then delivered the line that changed everything. "A trust doesn't argue. It just enforces." Those words echoed in my mind. A trust doesn't argue. It just enforces. It was the perfect solution. A silent, unfeeling, unmovable guardian for my grandparents' legacy. It was a shield. It was a fortress. It was a way to honor my grandmother's note, to keep their home in the right hands. Not mine, not my parents', but in the hands of a legal entity built to protect it from the very greed that sought to destroy it. A wave of calm washed over me. For the first time in months, I felt powerful. I wasn't a victim anymore. I had a plan. I looked Rebecca straight in the eye, my voice steady and clear for the first time in a long time. "That's what I want to do," I said. "Let's build a fortress." The decision to build a fortress was one thing. Laying the first stone was another. My first few meetings with Rebecca Crane were a crash course in a world I never knew existed. She would slide thick documents across her polished mahogany desk, and I would stare at words like trustee, beneficiary, and irrevocable, feeling a familiar wave of inadequacy. My father's voice echoed in my head, the one that called me emotionally unstable and not in the right state of mind. For a moment, I felt like a child playing dress-up in the world of powerful adults. Rebecca must have seen the doubt on my face. She would pause, lean forward, and translate the dense legal language into simple human terms. "Think of the trust as a treasure chest, Maya," she explained during one session, pointing to a complex-looking flowchart. "Right now, the treasure, the house, the stocks, the savings, is sitting out in the open. Anyone can try to claim it. We're going to put that treasure into this chest. We're going to give the chest a name, the Evelyn and Robert Foundation, and then we're going to lock it with a special key." "And I'm the only one with the key?" I asked, my voice small. "Not exactly," she said. And this was the part that truly clicked for me. "You're not the owner of the chest. You're the guardian, the trustee. Your job is to make sure the treasure is used exactly the way the instructions say. The instructions we're about to write. And once those instructions are locked in, no one can change them. Not you, not your parents, no one." The process was slow and methodical. It took 6 months. 6 months of phone calls, paperwork, and quiet, determined work. The first step was the biggest, transferring the house. Rebecca handled the legal side, drafting a new deed. My part was emotional. I had to sign a document that legally relinquished my personal ownership of the only home I had ever truly known. I sat in Rebecca's office, the pen hovering over the signature line. My hand was shaking. It felt like I was giving it away, just like my mother would later accuse me of doing. I looked up at Rebecca, my fear evident. "You're not losing it, Maya," she said gently, as if reading my mind. "You're protecting it. You're making it untouchable." I thought of my grandmother's note. "Make sure this home stays in the right hands." The trust was the right hands. I took a deep breath and signed my name. The stroke of the pen felt both like a monumental loss and a profound victory. Next came the financial assets. This was a tedious, painstaking process of contacting banks and investment firms. I spent hours on the phone, navigating automated menus and speaking to dozens of representatives. Each call was the same. I would have to explain that I was the executor of my grandparents' estate and that I was transferring the assets into a newly formed trust. Every time I said the words, the Evelyn and Robert Foundation, I felt a surge of strength. I was giving their name a new life, turning their legacy into an active force in the world. Some days were harder than others. While sorting through a box of my grandfather's financial statements, I found a small leather-bound notebook. Inside, in his familiar handwriting, were notes from his early days of investing. He had taped a picture of a much younger me, maybe 5 or 6 years old, onto the inside cover. Below it, he had written, "For Maya's future." A wave of grief and guilt washed over me. Was I betraying his wish? He had saved all this for me, and I was locking it away. I almost called Rebecca to tell her I had changed my mind. But that same afternoon, a text message popped up on my phone. It was from Daniel. "Still playing hard to get with the money, huh? Just letting you know, I saw a house I really like. Don't make me wait too long." The casual, entitled arrogance of it was like a bucket of ice water. It snapped me right back to reality. My grandfather had saved that money for my future. A future where I was safe and independent. Not a future where I was a walking ATM for my family's whims. I was not betraying his wish. I was fulfilling it in the only way I could. We worked with a financial advisor to structure the trust. Rebecca had suggested a charitable remainder trust, or CRT. She explained it with another simple analogy. "It's like a magic pot," she said. "The pot is filled with all the estate's assets, which will be responsibly invested to grow over time. Every year, the pot will give you a spoonful of porridge, in this case, 5% of its total value. That's roughly $150,000 a year, Maya. More than enough for you to live comfortably for the rest of your life. You get to eat, but the pot always stays full. Then, when you no longer need it, the rest of the pot will be given to a cause your grandparents cared about." The cause was the easiest part of the whole decision. My grandmother had been a passionate environmentalist before it was fashionable. She had a degree in botany and volunteered at the local nature preserve. Her dream had been to go back to school to study marine biology, a dream she gave up to raise my mother. We designated the foundation's remainder to fund scholarships for underprivileged students, specifically young women, pursuing degrees in environmental science. My grandmother's dream wouldn't die with her. It would be reborn, over and over again, in the lives of other young women. The final piece of the fortress was what Rebecca called the poison pill. It was a no-contest clause. "This is our insurance policy," she explained, her expression serious. "We will write into the trust that your parents and your brother will each receive a token inheritance of $10,000. It's a gesture of goodwill. However, the clause will state that if any of them try to legally challenge the trust in any way, they automatically forfeit that inheritance. They get nothing." It was brilliant. It used their own greed against them. The risk of losing a guaranteed $10,000 would be enough to stop them from gambling on a lawsuit they were almost certain to lose. It made the trust not just strong, but bulletproof. The day we finalized everything, I met Rebecca at her office. A thick stack of documents sat on the desk. It was the culmination of 6 months of work. As I signed the last page, my hand was steady. A profound sense of peace settled over me. The fortress was complete. The treasure was safe. For the next 18 months, I lived in that peace. I didn't hear from my family, and for the first time in my life, the silence wasn't a punishment. It was a gift. I started to heal. I started to build a life on my own terms. I had no idea that the siege was not over. They were just regrouping for one final assault. The doorbell rang on a Tuesday afternoon. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and my blood ran cold. It was my mother holding a plate of cookies wrapped in plastic wrap, a bright fake smile plastered on her face. Behind her stood my father, looking uncomfortable in a blazer, and behind him, my brother Daniel, his eyes glued to his phone. An ambush. After 18 months of complete and utter silence, they were on my doorstep. My first instinct was to pretend I wasn't home, to retreat back into the quiet safety I had built for myself. But then I thought of Rebecca's words, of the fortress we had built. The fortress was designed for this very moment. I couldn't hide behind the walls. I had to stand on top of them. I took a deep breath, unlocked the door, and opened it. "Maya!" my mother chirped, her voice an octave too high. "We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by. I baked your favorite oatmeal raisin." She hadn't baked my favorite cookies since I was 10 years old, and my favorite was chocolate chip. The lie was so careless, so thoughtless, it was almost insulting. "Hello, Mom," I said. my voice even. I didn't smile. I stepped aside to let them in, a silent, reluctant invitation. They filed into my small living room, each of them looking around as if they were inspectors. My father sniffed the air. Daniel immediately sat on my couch and pulled out his phone again, his thumb scrolling furiously. It was a performance of disinterest, but his presence was as loud as a shout. My mother placed the cookies on the coffee table with a little flourish. "Your place is so cozy," she said, the word hanging in the air like a polite insult. "What do you want?" I asked. I didn't have the energy for small talk. I wasn't going to pretend this was a normal family visit. My father cleared his throat, stepping into his role as the family patriarch. "Now, Maya, is that any way to greet your family? We haven't seen you in a long time. We were worried." "You were worried," I repeated, the words flat and dead. "You haven't called in a year and a half, but today you were worried." The air grew thick with tension. The fake smiles faltered. This was it. The real reason they were here was about to make its appearance. My dad sat in the armchair opposite me, leaning forward, clasping his hands together like he was about to close a business deal. "Look, Maya," he began, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone. "We think enough time has passed. It's time to be practical about the estate. In fact, we've been talking to a developer, a very motivated one." My mother jumped in, her voice eager. "He specializes in coastal properties. He said that with the way the market is, the house and the land could go for $4 million. Maybe even more. Can you imagine?" I just stared at them. They spoke of the house like it was a winning lottery ticket they had been waiting to cash. They had been working on this, making calls, meeting with developers, all behind my back, all while I was living in my peaceful silence, thinking I was free. Daniel finally looked up from his phone, a smirk playing on his lips. "Don't overthink it, sis," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's a no-brainer. You sell the place, we split it 4 ways. You'll still walk away with a cool $1 million. You can buy whatever cozy little apartment you want." There it was. The offer. The assumption. The absolute certainty that I was just a gatekeeper to their fortune, and that my share was a generous price for my cooperation. They thought they had me cornered. They saw me as the same quiet, invisible girl who would eventually cave under pressure. They had no idea who I had become. I didn't say anything. I let their words hang in the air, let the greed and entitlement fill every corner of the room. I watched their faces, expectant, waiting for my surrender. My mother's nervous smile, my father's confident posture, my brother's arrogant smirk. Slowly, I stood up. The movement was deliberate. All eyes were on me. I walked over to the small desk in the corner of my living room. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a thick folder. It was a copy of the trust documents that Rebecca had made for me. It was my shield. It was my sword. I walked back to the coffee table and placed the folder on it. The sound it made was soft, but it landed with the force of a gavel. "You might want to see something first," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a knife. Daniel, ever the impatient one, snatched the folder. He opened it and began flipping through the pages, his expression bored at first, then confused. He slowed down, his eyes scanning the legal text. I watched his face as he processed the words, "The Evelyn and Robert Foundation, Trustee, Charitable Remainder Trust." The smirk melted from his face. His confident posture collapsed. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the papers. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and fury. "What the hell is this?" He spat, the words a raw, ugly sound. I looked at him, then at my mother, then at my father. I held their gazes one by one. I let the silence stretch, savoring the first moment of their powerlessness. "It's the trust," I said calmly. "The one I established 18 months ago. The property isn't mine to sell anymore. None of it is. The house, the stocks, the savings, it all belongs to the Evelyn and Robert Foundation." I paused, letting the information sink in. "I'm the trustee. I manage it. The income supports me, as per my grandparents' wishes for my care, and the rest of the estate is dedicated to funding scholarships." My mother's face went pale. The fake smile was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed horror. Her hand went to her chest, a gesture of melodrama that was second nature to her. Her voice was a cracked whisper. "You gave it away?" she asked, as if I had just confessed to setting it all on fire. I looked directly at her, at the woman who had left me to be raised by others, who saw love as a transaction and family as an opportunity. And I delivered the line I had been rehearsing in my mind for a year and a half. "No," I said, my voice perfectly steady, without a trace of anger or triumph. Just a simple, clean statement of fact. I protected it. From you. The silence that followed my words was a living thing. It was heavy, suffocating, and filled with the wreckage of their expectations. The 3 of them stared at me, their faces a gallery of disbelief and dawning rage. It was my father who broke first. His face, which had been a mask of calm reason just moments before, began to turn a deep, mottled red. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against my hardwood floor. "You can't do that," he bellowed, his voice echoing in the small room. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "That's our family's money. We're family." I didn't flinch. I had spent my entire life being intimidated by his anger, shrinking myself down to avoid setting him off, but I wasn't that person anymore. I looked at his furious face and felt nothing but a distant pity. "You mean we share DNA?" I replied, my voice still quiet, which only seemed to enrage him more. "That's not the same thing. Family shows up, Grandma and Grandpa showed up. You didn't." The truth of the statement hit him like a physical blow. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, sputtering. He had no response. Daniel was next. He threw the folder onto the coffee table, the papers scattering. "You've lost your mind," he shouted, his voice cracking with a mix of fury and panic. He began to pace the small space between the couch and the television, running his hands through his hair. "A foundation? Scholarships? What kind of stupid sentimental garbage is that? That was millions of dollars. Our millions." "It was never yours, Daniel," I said simply. He whirled around to face me, his handsome features twisted into an ugly sneer. "It was supposed to be. You stole it. From all of us." "Actually," I said, and I allowed myself a small, sad smile. "I think I finally found my peace." That was when my mother found her voice again. But it wasn't her angry voice. It was something far more dangerous, her victim voice. Tears began to well in her eyes, big, theatrical tears that I had seen her use 100 times to get what she wanted. "Maya, how could you be so cruel?" she sobbed, her hand clutching at her heart. "To do this to your own mother. After everything I've done for you. I raised you." Her voice trailed off as the lie hung in the air between us. She didn't raise me. Her parents did. The audacity of her attempt at manipulation was so stunning, it was almost laughable. "You can stop, Mom," I said, my tone gentle but firm. "It's not going to work anymore." My father, having recovered from his initial shock, tried a new tactic. Threats. "I'll call a lawyer," he snarled. "We'll fight this. We'll have you declared incompetent. We'll break this ridiculous trust." This was the moment. The final card I had left to play. I kept my expression neutral. "You can try," I said, "but you should probably know about the no contest clause." Their heads all snapped toward me. The word clause got their attention. "I had a feeling you might react this way," I continued, choosing my words carefully. "So, Rebecca, my lawyer, and I included a provision in the trust. It's quite common. In recognition of our family connection, the trust allocates a one-time gift to each of you. $10,000. I saw a flicker of something. Greed, interest in their eyes. They were already calculating. 10,000 was an insult compared to the millions they had expected, but it was still money. "However," I went on, my voice dropping slightly, "the no contest clause is very specific. If any of you, or anyone acting on your behalf, attempts to challenge the validity of the trust in any court, for any reason, you immediately forfeit that gift. You get nothing. Not a single cent." I watched the color drain from their faces. I watched the rage in my father's eyes curdle into cold, hard panic. I watched Daniel stop pacing, his mouth hanging open. I watched my mother's fake sobs hitch and die in her throat. I had them. I had used the one thing they understood, money, to trap them completely. The thought of fighting a long, expensive legal battle they would likely lose was bad enough. But the thought of fighting it and also losing a guaranteed $10,000 was, to them, unthinkable. Their greed had become its own cage. My father's jaw was clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. He looked from me to the papers on the table and back again. He was a man who was used to being in charge, to having the final word, and he had no words left. He had been legally and completely disarmed. My mother, realizing the fight was lost, made one last, desperate appeal. Her voice was soft now, pleading. "Maya, please," she whimpered. "We just wanted to make things fair for everyone." That word again, fair. The hypocrisy of it was a physical thing. It rose up in my throat, a bitter taste. And for the first time, I let my own history come out, not as an accusation, but as a series of quiet, simple questions. "Fair?" I repeated, my voice still calm. "Where was fairness when you left me at Grandma and Grandpa's house when I was 14 and barely looked back? Where was fairness when Grandma had to pay for my first year of college because you had just bought Daniel a new car? Where was the concern for what was fair when Grandpa was sick, and you only visited him twice in the hospital, but you were the first one to call the lawyer after he died?" A dead silence fell over the room. There were no answers. There was no defense. I had laid the truth out on the table, right next to the scattered pages of the trust, and it was as solid and undeniable as the document itself. They knew it was over. My father grabbed his blazer from the back of the chair, his movements stiff and angry. Daniel shoved his phone in his pocket and walked to the door without another word, without even looking at me. My mother was the last to leave. She stood in the doorway, her face streaked with mascara. The tears looked real this time, but I knew she wasn't crying for the daughter she had lost. She was crying for the money. She gave me one last look, a look of profound, venomous hatred. Then she turned and followed her husband and son. The door clicked shut behind them, and my little apartment was filled with a silence that was deeper and more complete than any I had ever known. The war was over, and I was the only one left on the battlefield. After the door closed, I stood in the middle of my living room for a long time, listening to the silence. My body was thrumming with adrenaline, my hands shaking slightly. I looked at the plate of cookies on the coffee table, a sad, pathetic symbol of their Trojan horse invasion. I picked up the plate, walked it to my kitchen, and scraped the cookies into the trash can. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. The fight was over, but the emotional debris was everywhere. I knew I couldn't stay in my apartment. The air felt thick with the ghosts of their anger and greed. I grabbed my keys and my purse and walked out to my car. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just drove. I found myself on the highway, heading north along the coast, the city lights shrinking in my rearview mirror. An hour later, I knew where I was going. I was going home. I pulled off the highway and onto the familiar winding road that led to my grandparents' house. It was late, and a full moon hung in the black sky, casting a silver sheen over the ocean. I parked the car at the end of the long gravel driveway and got out. The air smelled of salt and night-blooming jasmine from the bushes my grandmother had planted along the fence. The sound of the waves crashing on the shore was a steady, rhythmic heartbeat. It was the sound of my childhood, the sound of safety. The house stood on the bluff, dark and silent, but it didn't look empty. It looked peaceful watching over the ocean. Under the moonlight, it seemed to glow. I walked up the porch steps, the wood creaking under my feet in a familiar way. I sat down on the top step, the same spot where my grandfather and I used to sit for hours, counting stars while he told me stories about being a young man. I could almost feel him there beside me, a steady, reassuring presence. I imagined him putting a hand on my shoulder and saying, "You did good, Maya. You did the right thing." I thought about the confrontation with my family. I replayed their words, their expressions of rage and disbelief. For a moment, a wave of bitterness washed over me. What kind of people were they? What kind of parents see their child not as a person, but as an obstacle to wealth? But the bitterness faded as quickly as it came, replaced by a profound sense of release. Their power over me was broken. Their anger could no longer hurt me. Their disappointment was no longer my burden to carry. I was free. I reached into my purse and pulled out a letter I had received a few weeks prior. The envelope was made of thick, creamy paper, and the return address was from the financial aid office of a state university. I had read it a dozen times, but I needed to read it again tonight. I unfolded the single page, the paper worn soft along the creases, and read it in the pale moonlight. It was a thank you letter from the very first recipient of a scholarship from the Evelyn and Robert Foundation. Her name was Lena. She was a 19-year-old girl from a poor town in the middle of the state, the first in her family to go to college. "Dear Miss Thompson," the letter began, her handwriting neat and careful. "I don't know how to thank you. When I received the letter telling me I had been awarded the Evelyn and Robert Foundation scholarship, my mom and I just sat at our kitchen table and cried. I have wanted to be a marine biologist since I was 6 years old, when my dad took me to the ocean for the first time. He passed away a few years ago, and since then, college has felt more like a dream than a plan. I was working 2 jobs this summer just to save up enough for books, and I was so scared of the debt I would have to take on. This scholarship changes everything for me," she continued. "It's not just the money. It's the fact that someone I've never met believes in me. It makes me want to work even harder, to prove that your faith in me is deserved. I looked up your grandparents online. I read that your grandmother loved the ocean and studied botany. I hope I can make her proud." The letter ended with a line that broke my heart and healed it all at the same time. "Because of you, and because of them, I can study the ocean instead of just dreaming about it." Sitting there on the porch of the house my grandparents had built, the house I had just saved, I started to cry. But these were not the angry, hurt tears I had cried for so much of my life. These were tears of gratitude, tears of peace. In that moment, I finally understood what I had done. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge is a hot, fiery, destructive thing. It would have felt good for a moment maybe to see my family's faces fall, but it would have left me scorched and empty. What I felt now was not the satisfaction of winning a fight. It was the deep, quiet peace of having created something good out of something painful. The love my grandparents had given me hadn't died with them, and it wasn't locked away in a bank vault. It had been transformed. It had been planted in new soil. It was paying for Lena's books. It was funding her education. It was giving her a chance to live her dream. Their love didn't end. It evolved. It had become something immortal, a legacy that would ripple outwards, touching lives they would never know, creating a future they had only dreamed of. I looked out at the dark ocean, the silver path of the moon stretching across the water. The waves crashed and receded, a timeless rhythm of letting go and returning anew. I had protected what was sacred, not the money, but the love it represented. And in doing so, I had finally, truly, come home. If you've ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to love you most, remember this. You don't owe them your silence. You don't owe them your inheritance. And you certainly don't owe them your peace of mind. You owe it to yourself and to the memory of the people who truly loved you to protect what's sacred. What I did wasn't revenge. Revenge is about settling a score. This was about honoring one. It was about choosing legacy over blood. So tell me in the comments, would you have done the same? And if you've ever had to build a fortress around your own peace to protect yourself from people who called your boundaries selfish, hit that subscribe button and share your story, because sometimes the greatest justice isn't loud and explosive. Sometimes it's legal, quiet, and permanent, just like mine.